season from everything I could tell. But he's not quite there. Again, Dallas Cowboys, again, great drafting team. They grabbed Micah Parsons, linebacker at 12. He's already gotten the Pro Bowl. So in some cases, this particular model is working well. And then, hey, it's a Trey Lance. Again, like he played this year. Jalen Waddle at 6. He has had a good year. Shad Bateman, Justin Fields, J.C. Horn, Trevor Lawrence, and others. So, and on down. Okay, there was 2 others. Rashawn Slater, offensive tackle, yes, and Jamar Chase. So if you look at the top 15 that I had, 4 made the Pro Bowl. Pretty good for the model performance there. Say, well, how the players that predicted, they're there. My number 1 pick definitely made it. I'll take 2 out of 3. The models are pretty well. The top 2 out of 3 that my predictions came through is per the model there. Okay, now let's look at who did draft well or the bus. So we said Malcolm Kuntz, who was the 79th pick, wasn't going to do well. Basically, on the Raiders. Sam Pacini, Trayvon Mooring, Jamin Davis, and Alex Leatherwood. And that's just mostly due to the fact that you've got a couple items here we're breaking down. One, the Raiders are so bad that I'm picking that they're not going to do well. Alex Leatherwood, offensive tackle at Alabama, he actually was moved to guard for the Raiders. And he's done a little bit better, but we'll see if he ever makes a Pro Bowl. Maybe he'll make it a guard, maybe he'll make it a tackle. And then Jamin Davis so far has just been okay. Trayvon Mooring, probably the most interesting player here. He was the 43rd pick. He was a safety, 2nd round. Again, because he was drafted by the Raiders, say he's not going to do well at TCU. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on Trayvon and maybe Sam Pacini here. And maybe the Raiders do get better at developing and drafting players too. Okay, moving right along. All right, so I mentioned previously, tools used, Alteryx, Tableau, and Excel. And then I've got some takeaways here. For Alteryx, I use this software. I love it. I'm actually certified. I've got my core of advanced certification, and I might get a couple of others in the future. But definitely, I used it for web scraping, data cleaning, data munging, data modeling, and software development. So I was able to do this entire process in just one set of software, everything from going to websites, scraping and joining and modeling. So I love the software, and I was able to use it a lot. I use the Find Replace tool with an alias versus name for join, extremely useful. Some of the public modules are beneficial in adapting previous models and new ones. Again, UK Data School borrowed some of their modules, and I adjusted them. All right. As far as logistic regression, definitely closely to binary used to determine positive value. Pro Bowl starter and alternate that can have some erroneous data. We mentioned that with AJ Hawk. Hey, I had him as one of the biggest busts in my list. Probably isn't. He was an alternate, so clearly was a good pick. Plus, it's been there 10 years. So maybe there's something I can do to improve the model. Hey, you know what? Maybe if we say, if they're not a bust, but they stay with the team for 5 years, I can use that, and then use that as a way to use it as a binary classifier. Say, you know what? Okay, so we got Pro Bowler, good pick. 5 years more, good pick, to see who else is there and see who else may or may not been changed. Data cleaning, I mentioned. Hey, that's really essential. You've got to do data cleaning, and I also think is the munging, as I mentioned, the 2 Adrian Petersons that gave me some issues, and the fact that with over 5,000 players or so, 255 times 20 years, about 5,000 players drafted, you have some names that are the same. It can be a little bit difficult to decipher there. So you got to make sure you're not having duplicates in there. Because at one point I ran the model and it had a one player, and it was something like Mark Davis, I think it was, and then it showed, oh wow, this great pick. He was a 6th, 7th round pick. It was like, okay, no, not that guy, somebody else, or the Adrian Peterson. He was a 6th pick from the MAC, and it showed up there. All right, so now here we go. My subjective takeaways from NFL. Do not draft a running back in the first round unless you're sure they'll be a slam dunk Pro Bowler, right? Because that can be tough. Because you see in the model, there's a lot of other really good running backs there. We mentioned Reggie Bush. Hey, he went number 2. There's a lot of great players. Joseph Adai actually was a Pro Bowl running back a little bit later. We mentioned some of the other folks. Also, I mentioned players in the top 5 will have a giant scope, but 6 to 10, and then later don't seem to get noticed as much. And sometimes if you pick a player, you're in the top 5. Sometimes either A, maybe you should trade down and get a player later on, or B, if you do take a player that high, just remember that the scope will definitely be on you. And if that player doesn't develop, it'll be there, but it won't be noticed nearly as much as a player at 5 or 6 picks lower on. Quarterbacks are not as risky as generally seen. We look at some of the top quarterback busts, they have actually fared well with my standard, right? The quarterbacks haven't been as bad to take as others. We mentioned the fact that, some of the other players going very high, some of the linebackers we mentioned, and then others were actually a lot riskier. But taking a quarterback in the draft isn't as risky. They do tend to make the Pro Bowls, right? They can be good players. However, I think the reason why people have so much determination about drafting quarterbacks is the fact that if you whiff on a quarterback, everyone will remember. As I mentioned, hey, Jamarcus Russell, he's definitely well known, and David Carr. They remember those players that are get whiffed on, especially as their quarterbacks. But if it's a defense line player or offensive player, people won't remember. So it isn't necessarily as risky, but if it doesn't work out in your favor, it will be remembered, which was one interesting thing to mention. And one of the reasons why I did this model was to say, where is the actual risk, and where is the actual risk as far as what people will say in passing and mentioning players and players and that sort of thing. Some draft years are much better than others. Take careful examination of players. Just say, here's draft. Totally, dead on. You have certain drafts where for top to bottom, there are a lot of really, really, really good players that are going to be drafted, and then other drafts are just not going to be as much. And maybe those other drafts, maybe now. That's not to say the fact that in certain drafts you'll have players that'll make Pro Bowls or whatnot, and then other years you'll have drafts where you'll have a lot of good quality and depth, but not necessarily players you just send the level of Pro Bowl player. So again, I'm going to look at that when I do future modeling efforts to say, how good is a real draft based upon some of the numbers. And the college doesn't matter in terms of whether or not they will be a great player or bust, although not necessarily whether they should be drafted or not. And I don't make that clear. So that means is that, just because you're in Alabama doesn't mean you're going to be a Pro Bowler or be the next great player. Great players are coming from all over. And, however, as you can see, there have been a lot of great players from other schools. So, you can see with Alabama and Ohio State, there's going to be a lot of great players there. So you can see those programs are definitely churning out year in, year out over 20 years, a lot of these great players that are going to come from these schools, but not necessarily whether or not they're going to be a Pro Bowl player and from there on. Okay, hey, thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate this. This is my first video that I'm ever going to upload to YouTube from my channel. So please let me know what you think in the comments. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Matt Reese. Thank you for listening, and take care. Goodbye.